Hello, I am Dr. Farshad Amini Behbahani, and this is short course of Iranian traditional medicine. In this section, we evaluate the components of the pulse. First component that you should detect on the pulse is volume of the pulse. It contains three dimensions. I mean height, width, and length of the pulse. For evaluating of the length of the pulse, you should put all of your four fingers on the wrist, on the radius artery, and after proper pressure, you should see if you feel the pulse less than the four fingers, for example, in 2 fingers or in 3 fingers, it is a short pulse. If you feel it under all of your 4 fingers, slightly divide your fingers and lose and let some distance between your fingers. If you still feel the pulse under all of your four fingers, it is a long pulse. If it's not, it is a moderate pulse that is detected only under 4 fingers. For evaluating of the width of the pulse, you need only 1 finger. If the pulse occupied all of your width of the fingers, all of your width of your fingertip, if it's so, it is a wide pulse. If it's not, it could be moderate pulse in width or a narrow pulse. To find the amount of moderate pulse that is different in different climate area, you should examine some moderate or balanced temperamental person in your area. Usually a wise, healthy person without any exaggeration in his or her movement and without laziness. A person with good manner and good ethic that barely become ill or catch diseases and is good in his or her shape and beautiful in his or her face is considered a balanced temperamental person. By detecting the normal or moderate amount of the width of the pulse, you can judge the patient, the other person, other patient pulse in width. In my examination, I considered less than half of the width of my finger a narrow pulse in my area. You should detect and determine your area. And for height of the pulse or prominency of the pulse, put your fingers on the wrist without any pressure. If you detect the pulse, you have a prominent or high pulse. But if you have to press somehow to detect the pulse, if it is a little above the surface of radius bone, it is considered a moderate height. But if you have to press until reach the beneath or at the level of the radius bone surface, you have a deep pulse. Recall pulse shape of the pulse. If the pulse is long, wide, and high or prominent, we call it large pulse. It shows enough force and elevated need for cooling, for example, and a good shape or good consistency of the vessel wall or arteries wall. If the pulse is narrow, short, and deep, we called it a small pulse. Usually, a prominent pulse is related to warmness, and deep pulse is related to coldness. Another component of the pulse is speed of the pulse. If the ascending part or expansion part under your fingertip, you can detect the speed of pulse only by one finger. If it is fast, then we have a fast pulse. If it is slow, then we have a slow pulse. You can find moderate pulse in speed by examination several healthy people in resting position. Exercise or psychotic feelings cause difference in speed of the pulse. Another component of the pulse is evaluation of distance between two pulses. If this distance become more, we have distinct pulse. We can detect distinct pulse in athletics. If this distance becomes short and two pulses become close to each other, we have frequent pulse. You can detect frequent pulse in fever. Another component of the pulse is the force of the pulse. When you put your finger on the artery, if you can collapse the artery easily, usually you have a weak pulse. A weak pulse is only detected barely on your fingertips skin, not deep, not in the muscle of your fingertips, not in the bone of your fingertips. If you have to put some pressure on the artery to collapse the pulse, usually we have moderate pulse, moderate in the force. And if you barely can collapse the artery pulse, and if you feel it even through your fingertip bones, not only the muscle but also in your fingertip bones, you have a strong pulse. A strong pulse is a normal pulse, contrary to the other components that usually the moderate amount of them is considered as normal pulse. In the force, and a strong pulse is a normal, is for a healthy person. A healthy person has a strong pulse. Another component that you should evaluate in the pulse detection is belong to the artery wall. Is artery wall soft? is when you sink your fingertip to the artery, you feel some pasty form or watery form of the artery wall. It is a soft pulse. Or if you feel a tight rope or feel a pen pipe under your fingertip, it is a hard pulse. I mean hardness in the artery wall. Usually softness comes from wetness and hardness comes from dryness. If you detect soft or hard pulse, you should evaluate the causes of dryness and the causes of wetness in your patient, which I explained it in previous sections. Another component of the pulse is the temperature of the pulse. For detecting of temperature of the pulse, put your fingertips, your 4 fingertips on the artery and hold it until the temperature of your fingertips become equal to the temperature of the inside of the artery. In that moment, you feel passing a hot wire through your fingertips. At that moment, put your fingertips above the wrist under the skin of this area and compare it to the skin of this area. If your fingertips is warmer than the skin of this area, your pulse is warm, and if your fingertips is colder than this area, your pulse is cold. If it has the same temperature, your pulse is moderate in temperature. Another component of the pulse is detecting fullness or emptiness of the artery. It needs more practice. You should feel the flow of the blood and spirit and the wind in the artery. When we have fullness of spirit or fullness of the wind, we feel some feeling like touching a balloon, a full aired balloon on the artery wall. When we have fullness because of the blood, we have sense of the fullness of the artery lumen. In emptiness, usually we have a wide pulse because the layers of the artery from round shape become like a surface and collapse on each other and generate a feel of wide. Another component of the pulse sensation is regularity or irregularity. Usually normal pulse is regular and abnormal pulse is irregular. Also, we have rhythm of the pulse, the proportion of the movement that you feel to all of the time of the pulse, that it is related to advanced course.